found were just some Ritz that my dad likes to eat, but I'm not exactly a huge fan myself. Well, what to do? I could just deal with the shortage of delicious goodies and have my mom go to the store on the weekend to get food, but I wasn't that patient. Luckily, about a 5-minute walk from my house is a little liquor store that also doubles up as a drive-through liquor store, in which one can arrive in their vehicle and pick up whatever it is they needed. Now, even though I could drive, I'm 19 years old by the way, my parents were out that night with a car, so with no other vehicle, I just decided to walk. I mean, why not? Apart from it being a cool 55 degrees, 5 minutes of walking isn't going to kill me. Besides, I needed to make time for the 9 p.m. release. So I grabbed myself an extra coat, put on my shoes, grabbed my phone and wallet, and I now take a few of the neighborhoods toward the liquor store. I arrived at approximately 8:25 p.m. There was one vehicle in the drive-thru and another individual who was looking at the section where all the alcohol is located. At the side of the liquor store, I saw a homeless man who was smoking a cigarette and appeared to be talking to thin air. I chose not to mind him as I walked right past him, and then I gave a hello to the employee on the clock that night, since he's friends with my dad. From there, I went to the area that has all the chips. Now, personally, I've always loved Cheeto Puffs, so that along with a Dr. Pepper, and I'm now on the way back home. So far, so good. That's until I reached the first neighborhood on my quest to start my Pokemon journey through the Sinnoh region. You see, I had my AirPods in, on transparency mode to be more specific, and so I ended up hearing something crunch just a few feet from where I was walking, followed by somebody cursing at themselves. When I turned around, I couldn't believe my eyes. It was the homeless man from the liquor store. But here's the thing. With illumination from the streetlight, I could see this man has a hold of a small blade. Chills now began to run down my spine as he starts to get closer to me, and he's now asking I hand over any valuables I had on my person. Phone, wallet, money, all of it. I won't lie, I thought it was a joke at first, until he said in a more serious tone that I was about to get stabbed if I didn't do as he said. Those words were enough to wake me out of my innocent mindset as I start to book it straight ahead toward where I could see a garage open with a light on. Luckily, I was pretty darn fast, so when I see a man working on his truck inside his garage, I yell that I was being chased by somebody with a knife. I'm so thankful for the quick actions of this complete stranger that I had never met before, because almost like on cue, he ushers me in as he reaches for a large hammer, now tells me to get into the house. Yeah, normally getting into some complete stranger's house would normally be a big no-no, but I was desperate at this point. Plus, when fear takes over, you do whatever it takes to get away from the danger. Anyway, I'm not even a step into this guy's house. His kids who I saw in the hallway looking at this complete scared 19-year-old entering their home, when I hear the man yell at the homeless guy to not step closer. I peeked through the doorway as I saw the homeless man simply just put the knife back in his coat, and he walked away like nothing happened. Those next few minutes were spent trying to calm my nerves as the wife of this man brings me a glass of water, and they now contact the authorities. They arrived in minutes, since we live near a police station, and after about 10 minutes of searching with the description I gave, they have our guy. Now, I won't lie to you, that in itself was a huge stress relief, as I was so scared he might have tried to go after somebody else who might have been walking that night. So yeah, that was pretty much it. The homeowner ended up walking me back to my house, and after I was settled in my room, with my nerves being calmed, I called my parents to notify them of what had taken place. They were approximately 30 minutes from the house, but they did arrive in half the time, after I explained that I was almost stabbed by some random homeless man on my way back home. Now, I'm not saying you should be scared to walk at night. It's really quite fun being out in the cold, peaceful quiet, but it might be best to have somebody with you. That, or maybe have a concealed carry, pepper spray, or a taser. I, being a naive 19-year-old, I never thought I would ever have a run-in with a crazy man, but I guess you gotta learn sooner or later. Am I right? This took place in the summer of 2011 when I went to visit my older cousin who lives in Southern California. For some context, I'm female, and I was 19 years old. Now, in total, I vacationed at my cousin's house for roughly 2 weeks, in which he took me to a bunch of fun and exciting places, some of the obvious ones being the Santa Monica Pier, the Observatory, Angel Stadium, and Disneyland. Now, even though those adventures were fun and exciting, there was one incident that happened to me when we went to Knott's Berry Farm in Buena Park, California, that really changed everything. Now, this isn't the scariest thing per se, but it is quite creepy, and it makes you wonder, what's wrong with certain people? So let's begin. Arriving to the lines. I can recall kids playing and screaming, running around in circles, as themed music played over the loudspeakers. Adults were looking at their phones and talking amongst each other, as my cousin and I got behind a couple of teenagers and started to wait for our turn to enter the park. About 5 minutes of waiting, and the line slowly is moving forward. I couldn't help but notice this man, all by himself, with no other family or kids, and he's looking at me really funny. To give you a rough description of him, he was about 5'11", 190 pounds, wearing a long white t-shirt with loose blue jeans. He was bald with a goatee, and he had tattoos on his neck as well as full-on tattoo sleeves on his arms. Something that stood out also was the Ace of Spades tattoo he had under his left eye. Anyway, I tried to ignore him as I got the vibe he was one of those typical creeps, as my cousin also notices him too. But just as we're a few groups behind the ticket taker, the man asks me if I had a boyfriend, and if I was interested in spending time with him. He continued by saying he could get me to the front of every line as he knows the owner of the park and was good friends with him too. Highly doubtful. Now, I thought people around me were going to say something, but no one did, which was pretty odd. I ignored him, and he kinda seemed to just awkwardly back off, as I made the assumption he was embarrassed by my response. So, anyway, we are soon inside Knott's Berry Farm, and for the first few hours my cousins and I are having a good time. I'd already put the weird creeper in the back of my head, and so far things are great, apart from the large crowd. At noon we started to get pretty hungry, and I opted to grab ourselves a couple of hamburgers and french fries. This is the point I had the urge to use the restroom, so I told my cousin I'd be right back, as she takes a seat and waits for our order. I did have difficulty finding the restroom, but luckily a janitor was able to point me to the nearest one, which apparently I had totally missed. So I did my thing, and then I stepped out, ready to head back to enjoy a delicious meal. But guess who I bumped into? Remember the man from earlier who claimed to know the owner of Knott's Berry Farm? Yeah, here he is, presumably going to the restroom. However, spotting me, it seems he's changed his mind. Hey, I thought I'd never see you again. Did you have some time to think over what I said? I can still recall him saying to me with this really creepy smile as I pushed past him, and I continue. He starts to follow me, and it's at this moment I'm getting pretty creeped out. Why would he be following me? And what had I done to deserve this? Not sure. But one thing I wanted to do was grab the attention of someone as I'm making the walk back to the food area. Perhaps a security guard. Well, it seemed as if Lady Luck was on my side, because the next sequence of events was just so strange and weird. After continuously catcalling me, someone actually overhears one of the comments and comes up to the man and asks him if there was an issue. The guy was huge. He was easily over 6'5". I'd estimate about 240 to 250 pounds. Now, so that I don't confuse you all, I'm going to refer to this guy as Kevin. Why exactly Kevin? I guess it's because my favorite wrestler's name is Kevin Owens. But whatever, let me continue. This is none of your business. My daughter is just being very difficult. When I heard the creep say that sentence, I got the sudden chills. Was that what he thought? I proceeded to tell Kevin, who was there with his 2 daughters, that I had no idea who he was, and that he had been following me for the past few minutes. It seemed Kevin also didn't believe him, as he had overheard some of the catcalling, and he knew for a fact you don't say those certain phrases to your so-called daughter. After about 10 seconds, Kevin basically calling out the creeper, it seemed he's learned his lesson and he's going to turn around and leave. Kevin then starts walking over to me, but I remember gasping as I tell Kevin to turn around. The creeper suddenly charges toward our direction, and I can remember as Kevin turns around and practically knocks the dude's teeth out of his mouth. Yeah, a direct hit. The creeper pretty much stumbles back for a few seconds and just looks over to us with a look of anger and defeat. The security guard did happen to see this very moment, and he walked over to try and see what was going on as a crowd of onlookers started to form. Before the security guard could question Mr. Creeper, however, he just runs away. Luckily, after some explaining, the security guard gets on his radio and promises us they'll try to find the creep, and they'll kick him out of the park too. Not sure if they ever did catch him, as neither myself nor my cousin saw the creep again. As for Kevin, I thanked him profusely, and he just told me that he was glad to have been there at the right place at the right time, as he was also very protective of his 2 young daughters, and he would have done the same thing. So anyway, that was the time myself and my cousin went to Knott's Berry Farm, and I met a so-called friend of the owner of the park. Hey Creepy Fox, I got a story for you. This happened to me during the fall of 2005, and it takes place in Santa Ana, California. I was working as a security guard for some apartment complexes, and I had been minding my own business, eating my lunch, and just listening to the sound of the rain underneath the cover of my little golf cart. While chilling, I couldn't help but notice what sounds like people arguing. I figured that at first maybe it was just something like a dad yelling at their kid for doing something wrong, but when I started to listen closer, I could clearly hear what sounds like 2 adult males arguing. I remember trying to see if I could locate where the arguing was coming from, since it sounded pretty close. And sure enough, I could see it down the little walkway, a short distance from where I was. Now, normally we don't really get involved with people arguing, but when I could see them begin to push and shove, I knew at that moment I had to at least call it in. I do. And then I decided to walk on over to see if I could maybe perhaps de-escalate the situation. You know, talk it out amongst adults, and try to find some sort of common ground. Little did I know what I was about to get myself into. Hey guys, calm down. What's going on? I said to both men as they continued to shove and argue. They continued to ignore me, as one of the men connects with a pretty mean right hook, knocking the other man to the floor. At this point, I had to try and do something, as backup still hadn't arrived. Normally, security guards aren't allowed to touch anyone, but if it's to defend yourself or someone else, you have to at least do something. Now that this guy was knocked down and things seemed to have settled, I figured that was going to be the end of it. However, what happens in the next moment as I'm standing just a mere feet from these men changes everything. The one on the floor, who was now starting to get up, exclaims he was going to, and I quote, kill him, saying that to the other man. These next moments felt like they went in slow motion, but it was really a matter of seconds. The one who had been knocked down takes out a handgun and fires a single shot in the other guy's general direction. He then suddenly takes off, disappearing behind one of the apartment buildings. I stood there frozen as I start thinking I had just bared witness to a cold-blooded murder. But here's the thing. I was surprised as I can still see the man who had been fired at still standing. But how? My main concern now was this man was going to need medical attention, but by some act of God, even though the shot did ring off at a decent close range, he hadn't been hit. Talk about a miracle. Thankfully, nobody else was hit by the stray bullet either, but that didn't mean that neither him or I were full of fear. We ended up being ushered into one of the apartment homes as police are called to locate the gunman, and my backup finally arrived. There was a huge manhunt that afternoon, with helicopters being deployed, and after roughly an hour, I'd overheard that they had caught the guy with the gun. Now, as it turned out, this wasn't just some random occurrence. The man who I spoke to, who was fighting with the guy with the pistol, told me that he was the boyfriend of one of his co-workers. I guess he had thought he was trying to steal his girlfriend away from him, even though he claims he never did anything wrong. So then on that afternoon, he came to call him out. One thing led to another, and they got into that fight, which then led to the shop being fired. I won't lie when I say that being so close to danger like that, it's something that changes your life forever. Sure, you can continue to live your life and move on, but even after so many years, you can't help but remember the emotions and the actions that pretty much defined your future. Just imagine had he connected with the man, or just imagine he tried firing at me too. Very scary thoughts, for sure. Footsteps in the night. Hey there,